Dr. Jemy Gatdula. Welcome to Power and Witness Podcast. And you are the Dean of the Law School at the University of Asia and the Pacific, which is a secular university, but they have spiritual formators or chaplains or Opus Dei priests. So they have a great influence, right, of Opus Dei into the school.
Yes.
Right. I was hoping to speak to you about the natural law. I know you did a show with Father Mitch about that, and I think it's so important in our culture today, with the loss of an understanding of objective truth and a natural moral law. It just seems like society fragments, right? Mm-hmm. My truth, your truth, who's to say, which is right. And, so I was hoping maybe you could tell us some basic tenets of the natural law.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here, Father Mark. And natural law is simply put it's an objective standard of right and wrong that any human being can arrive at with the use of right reason or the use of his intellect. It's actually part of a great intellectual tradition. In our case, stretching all the way back to the Greeks, wherein we can look at and value human goods, what we call human goods, to be able to pinpoint also what is right and wrong with the use of reason and without necessarily relying on scripture. And so it has been quite effectively been the basis of many of our great legal systems, including that of, obviously, of the United States and of the Philippines as well. We see it manifested in the creation of the United Nations, and quite dramatically when you have the Nuremberg trials and the Tokyo War trials as well. Natural law has served as some sort of a unifying idea or concept to bind human beings of varying cultures and traditions. So.
Right. That's true. With America being such a melting pot, so to speak, it has allowed all these different cultures to come together and things. And that's what we're known for. To be able to, like New York City, you'd have all these different groups. There has always been tensions and failures of unity, but overall, to get together in a reasonable way. So that's part of our founding documents. And the Philippines, your legal system is very similar to the U.S.
Yes, it's quite similar. And in fact, some of the wordings that you find, particularly in the Bill of Rights, is almost nearly identical.
Yeah.
Our form of government, the presidential unitary system, wherein we have two houses of Congress, a judiciary, which is headed by the Supreme Court, and then you have an executive branch, which is headed by one person, which is the president. The similarities are more apparent, actually real and apparent. Mm-hmm. So.
And I like that you brought up tracing it back to the ancient Greeks, because you think of like St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the greatest church theologians. He referred to Aristotle a lot in his Summa Theologiae, and even like the structure of the virtues. I mean, he took that from Aristotle,
yes,
and built upon that. So it shows a wonderful harmony between faith and reason, I think.
Very much so. Yeah. But also I have to add, one of the reasons why I mentioned that our intellectual tradition of natural law is going back all the way to the Greeks is because there are other natural law traditions quite similar, but not connected to the Western side. So you have natural tradition that is Islamic in nature. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest legal systems ever known, also make mention of the natural law. In fact, it's quite rare to be able to come up with a legal system that in some way or another does not refer to natural law. The Maturidi school, for example, of Islam would always heavily refer to a natural law. And so I think it speaks to the universality of natural law. It just so happened that because of the happy marriage that you mentioned earlier between Greek thought, particularly of Aristotle, which was fortuitously adopted by Aquinas, that we have come to know of natural law, particularly from that angle. Aquinas is such a towering figure that practically right now, with regard to the way law is practiced or taught or researched in, it's like as if there's Aquinas and then everybody else is a postscript to him.
Right.
So it's like Aquinas, and then everybody's either criticizing him or saying that he's right. So
Yeah, I guess if you just think of a court of law, you're judging it according to law. And I guess you could just say, yes, civil law, but civil law needs to be rooted in a natural law that binds everybody. That's the point I often make. Like in preaching about abortion, we say, because the other side would say, well, this is just your faith. This is just the teaching of your church. Why do I have to go by that? That's your choice or something. But we say like this law binds everyone. It's not, yes, our church affirms it, but it's not a religious truth first, right? It's you can't take human life, right? And that maybe that brings up the Ten Commandments too. It's like, through reason we believe that God exists, right? And so you can know that God exists through reason. I think Vatican I, said that very clearly. But all the commandments are a statement of the natural law. Lying, murder,
yes.
honor, you can't cheat and all this kind of stuff. So that, our revelation is affirming that, but it's affirming, because that's another great point too. It's like we say we can know it by reason, but we have fallen reason, right? And I see things through the lens of my own self-interest often.
Yeah, the thing with reason is that sometimes human beings are quite hard-headed. So we sometimes tell ourselves that, yes, I know that I have to diet. I know that I have to exercise. Then once in a while, a nice chocolate cake would come there and say, nah, I think I'll probably eat that chocolate cake. What Scripture is essentially saying is that it steps in to tell us, to instruct us in our flawed reason. Now, don't debate anymore. This is it. But there are a lot of times that we don't even need Scripture to come in.
Right.
That we have been blessed with an intellect that has been given to us by God, and we can tell what is right and wrong by the use of that reason.
Yeah. And I think in this country, we have a huge kind of culture war over like the sexual revolution, the fallout of that, of homosexuality, the trans movement. One time we were at the Walk for Life in San Francisco, and so you always have these counter demonstrators, protesters, pro-choice guys. And I remember this one guy he was kind of yelling he goes, these guys don't even believe in contraception, let alone abortion, It's like, and I remember kind of joking with my friend, we're telling him, be quiet, because there's just no way our country's going to accept that. And we have a hard enough time getting Catholics to accept, you can't contracept. But even that's part of the natural law. That the conjugal act needs to be open to life, that it's not what sexual faculty was designed for, to come together to give life. But it's like, I think it's just at the heart of that whole debate right now that's going on. It's not even a debate in the culture. The culture's accepted, the whole fallout of the sexual revolution. But it seems like the natural moral laws could come to the rescue, if we could proclaim it,
And I think that's where a lot of the societal breakdown came. As I was mentioning earlier in the interview with Father Mitch, at least before, when people would have political disagreements, they would essentially be falling into matters whether or not we should raise taxes, lower taxes. Should we be increasing, for example, government funding here or there? So that essentially was where the disagreements coming in. The problem that we have nowadays is that the disagreements are coming from the angle of whether or not we believe in one reality or are there varying realities. And you could see it also in the disturbing rise on the fashionable trend of thinking about multiverses, wherein you have different kind of universes happening around.
Right.
And it really becomes difficult, therefore, to have some sort of a public discourse when people's versions of reality are actually far, far different from each other. And so we end up talking past each other and so on. The thing is that if we really accept the scientific facts and reality, there shouldn't even be a disagreement on this. We know for a fact that the person, the moment a sperm and, for example, an egg would meet, at the moment of conception, you have a child. That little entity there would have its own DNA It will be, even though it will be dependent on the mother for a certain number of time, it would still be self-generating already, even though it's in the womb of the mother. We know that it has its own particular ability to nourish itself, although the nourishment will be coming from the mother. As I said earlier, it has its own DNA. So for all intents and purposes, it's a human being. And so if we come to the idea that a human being, a human life is of value, then abortion becomes something that's supposed to be prohibited or banned, because essentially it's the killing of a human life that is innocent and that does not deserve a punishment. You mentioned contraceptives earlier. The fact is that we know that human beings, each of us has an equal dignity, and that we should not be using another human being, because of the fact that to do so would be to degrade the humanity of that other person. But to use a contraceptive because of the fact that we would like to engage in a sexual act for our pleasure, without the consequences that may arise with regard to doing it with that other person, is essentially to be using that other person. And therefore, the use of the contraceptive will be, in effect, a dehumanizing of the other person that we're engaging in the sexual act with. Now, some people will say, what if you're both enjoying the sexual act? Then you're essentially dehumanizing each other. And that is what the contraceptive act does. In the end, to deny that there's a natural law is to deny the humanity that is in us. And we see that in the culture wars that are happening with regard to the transgender issue, the fact that we are mutilating our children, and you could see the loss of the humanity, the fact that they have come to such grotesque forms, grotesque appearances, is something really regrettable, and it's really difficult to be able to sometimes think of how we have arrived at that situation. So
Right. It's like license over true concept of freedom. Like freedom's rooted in truth, and in America, we've seemed to embrace just license. I want to do what I want, and disconnected it from truth. And I remember one priest, I heard him say one time, that contraception makes a thing of the woman or the man. You're
Yes.
just going to use that person. And John Paul II, I think he spoke in terms of this gift of self, and it's this one flesh union is a total giving of himself to the other. So contraception is say, well, okay, not the fertility part, but it's supposed to. I think he even said that, the wedding vows, the conjugal act gives flesh to the vows. This commitment, this bond that's formed, the conjugal act expresses this bond, this union that's have. So you don't hold parts of you back from the other. And I thought those were beautiful expressions. I saw too a reasoned argument was, if you think about ancient Rome, they're famous in our movies or whatever showing, they might have this big supper, a big lavish dinner, and then throw the food up and then eat again, right?
yeah.
And it's gross, right? It's gross to us that it's a misuse of our whole digestive system, right? You eat food, it's pleasurable, but it's like an abuse of it to throw it up, eat again, throw it up, eat again. And I think it is analogous to the sexual faculty, that it's like to contracept or something, is just to use it in a distorted way, not what it was meant for, intended for by design that we could see.
That's a really good point. When you talk, for example, to drug addicts, they start out with whatever the drug, they will start out with relatively small doses, and then later on, because of the fact that they become deadened to the sensation or pleasure, the more that they have to keep increasing the dosage of the drug that they have. With all pardon to your listeners, I remember Will Smith giving an account of how in the early days of his starrum, the sexual pleasure would come so easily to him that in the end, the sight of another woman naked before him would already cause him, actually, in his words, already be enough to cause him to vomit already, because his senses got so deadened already with all the availability of it.
Yeah.
And I think our ability to understand marriage in its proper sense causes, therefore, to turn away from that, value the body of the spouse that God has given you, and it leads us, therefore, to again emphasize the humanity of the other person and your own humanity,
Yeah.
rather than trying to engage in such pleasure and try to alienate yourself from your own humanity. Um, Ultimately, I think it's really a dead end. So.
Yeah. Yeah. That it's a marriage. The meaning of marriage is love, right? That we can. It seems like every culture hopefully would admit that. I know it has a significance in society and the fundamental structure of society that's so important as well. But yeah, to see it as a loving act and that we're going to give ourselves to the other, not use the other person. I've talked to men like spiritual direction and stuff that they might have had this disordered approach to sexuality, and been promiscuous and all this kind of stuff. And I remember when they were coming out of that, they talked about the difference in making love to their wife after that kind of almost addiction level of it, that it was a different thing. It was a personal thing, looking each other in the eyes, being an expression of love, and things, and not just objects and stuff. So, yeah, the Catholic Church has this rich teaching and it blesses people. I tell young people too, it's like, and sometimes, especially like a really young person that's sexually active, it's like, this is much more powerful than you, right? This needs to be in the context of marriage, like the safety of marriage almost. Yeah. Not to get hurt, not to be abused and stuff. And it's made for marriage. It's so powerful, and it can unite a couple so strongly. It can bring forth life. That needs to be protected by vows. The other person needs to know, hey, you're really committed to me. If I'm going to open myself up to you in this way and not get hurt, I need to know that you're committed to me, right? And so there's all these beautiful teachings. I think people know deep down, but it's yet Christianity is mocked for it.
Well, media has been giving us or feeding us this lie that sexuality is essentially just another human bodily function. It's like something that to express it, doing it is without any consequences is the most natural thing, and that there's really nothing to sexuality and all of that. It reminds me again, and hopefully this will not be shocking to your listeners. There was this porn actress, very famous porn actress, and she wrote in a biography once, in her biography. And she was being interviewed during the book review for that biography of hers, and the interviewer asked her, "How do you form relationships among knowing that you come from this background?" And this porn actress said, "Well, first of all we start dating people who are not part of the porn industry, but eventually the other person would not be able to take the idea that the partner that they have is having sex with multiple people several times a day and so on. And so we eventually end up having relationships with people within the industry itself. So you would have eventually people, the porn actor and porn actress, they'll be the ones that will get married or have a more or less a permanent bond or relationship. But this is where the interesting part comes in. So you have two people who are both in the same industry, where they have sex with several people multiple times a day as part of their work, and one would think that that would be the proper combination or the appropriate combination where the other person understands what the other person's job is. But as this porn actress would say, eventually the relationship will break apart because eventually one of the partners will be unable to take the idea that the other partner is also having sex with another person. Yeah. And that was very interesting for me because one would think that porn actors or actresses would be already deadened to the idea of having, but even then, something in them, something in their humanity is calling out that this is not proper. Right. That's why they would essentially try to ask their partner, could you please stop doing this?
Right.
And that's where the relationship breaks down, because eventually they would probably choose their career over the relationship itself.
Yeah.
So
And I know John Paul II spoke so eloquently of like marriage being the fundamental cell of society, just the building block. And I've come to appreciate that the older I get, to see like Catholic families that have, I mean, it could be any family, but especially like the Catholic families that have like children and things that other people can gravitate. One, it's attractive. It's beautiful to see. And that I know we've interviewed like young people at colleges and Life on the Rock and stuff. And every now and then we'd meet like this family that would be like a kind of a hosting place for these young college kids to come have a barbecue, come have dinner, come meet. There was something very comfortable that they could go to this family and experience that, just to see two, people in love, caring for one another. And it's like, that's not what we get in the world, right?
Well, also because of the lie that has been told that there's really no difference between men and women. And in fact, the beauty of the marriage relationship is precisely in the fact that men and women are different from each other. And so when we look at the way the Bible is set up, the way Catholic teaching is, when I remember when in Genesis, when God created Eve, the wording in the English translation is usually to say, I need to provide Adam with a helpmate. But I can't remember the Jewish term, the original Jewish term where it came from.
Ezer? Something like that?
Yes. Yeah. And so it actually says it's a helpmate who's in a way adversary of the person. So you're looking here at someone who's actually opposite the male. And so there's this real tension between men and women. And that tension essentially is to keep them together into one place. It's like having, if you have a boat, you have one oar, and one is pulling the other side, the other is pulling the other side, and that's what essentially the male-female relationship is. And it keeps them going straight, rather than one dominating the other, and so on. So.
I heard one person, a philosopher, describe it too. You could look at it in some sense. You have these opposites. Different ways of relating. Women tend to be more communal, men more individualist, whatever all the differences are. But marriage can bring these two together, and solidify them, bring them together. And then a wonderful harmony and fruitfulness comes out of that. But it's like we need marriage just to bring men and women together.
although I can't remember the person who said this. I mean, he was a famous philosopher. Just for some reason I can't remember who said we need God, of course, in a marriage, because if God isn't in the marriage, the man and woman will kill each other. So that's probably right.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you think about it, in one sense, it's kind of easier. Men get men, women get women, so to speak. It's kind of easier for them to get along with just each other. But also, like we're saying, the opposite part is like the woman calls something out of the man, and the man calls something out of the woman, I think, it could be challenging in some sense. But I think in love, too, sometimes, we have like the hallmark view of it, but, you're kind of, it can be like a warfare that has good fruits to it. Right? You got to die to yourself. You got to carry that cross. You got people that call you to task and to give you something to work towards and to work for, to sacrifice for. But when I was growing up, I read this atheistic philosopher, Ayn Rand.
Oh, Ayn Rand.
And she was an Aristotelian, But interesting, she just saw the individual aspect of humanity. Man is individual, is a rational being. And then later, after I had a conversion experience, I was reading from a Catholic writer. He was analyzing some of her work. And basically he was saying she missed the communal aspect. I thought that was it. That was the whole thing about our philosophy that became inhuman. One reason, I think, because she didn't see us as male and female. He made them. That yes, individual, we image God on an individual level, but we also image God, the two coming together. we image Trinitarian love, communion of persons, as communion of persons in marriage. And, I think Christianity especially gives such a corrective on that, we're all united, right? The least, the marginalized, the poor, the suffering. And our history is, we're called continuously in the gospel to serve the least. And, but I thought that was an interesting difference. I think it could be there maybe in the ancients, but it's like this is the prime truth for Christianity.
The thing with Ayn Rand is that a lot of the position that she's coming from is essentially to combat communism. The problem however, with her is that she took an extreme view. Just to be able to combat communism, she took an extremely individualistic, selfish view on the matter, which then reminds me of Chesterton. He wrote somewhere, I think it's in Orthodoxy, wherein he likened the Catholic Church to this roller coaster running very, very fast, and the ability of the Catholic Church to be able to balance itself. Whereas some people would ideologically would go to the extreme of left or right.
Yeah.
The Catholic Church, for some reason, is able to maintain a balance, not shifting too much to the right, not shifting too much to the left, but rather just right, just to be able to maintain our recognition of humanity is. Ayn Rand's mistake was that in her hatred of communism, she completely turned away from the reality that people do still need each other. That in order for us to develop as human beings, we need to be able to relate to, care for, and talk to other people. And obviously, communism is the other extreme side of that. And I guess what one really has to wonder, be in awe of the Catholic Church, that through the years it has been able to maintain that balance quite well. So
I've really come to appreciate that balance, like the last few years, and just having a long vision of the church. I was reading about some of the struggles before Vatican II, like between the neo-Thomists and like the von Balthasar crowd, the Ressourcement, the Nouvelle theologians, of which you have like a Wojtyła. It was also a Thomist, but you got Ratzinger and von Balthasar and de Lubac, and both sides are good people, right? And they have a different approach and things, but you need the church to guide and balance. The older I get, it's like, man, we get it wrong so often. And even smart people, and even like great fathers of the church, there's usually some errors in their teaching, right? Origen's got a lot of beautiful things, but he's got a lot of craziness too, right?
Even Aquinas.
And you need the church to guide that. What does she settle on? What does she sift out in her history where they land on? Because none of us can get it right. There's such a richness to Catholicism and such a long view. And that, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And the church is uniting these giants, in their thought to come. I mean, that's where I see the long view of the history of the church. Like, what did she take up and hold on to? What did she develop,
And what sometimes I'm really in awe of the fact that, let's admit it, we had some pretty bad popes before, and but even then, even with regard to that history of bad popes, Alexander VI or whoever, Formatus perhaps, and the others, they never interfered with church doctrine or teachings.
Right.
They may be incredibly corrupt, they may steal property and so on, but in the end, they left the teachings untouched.
Right.
And so, it just fills me with great wonder at how the Catholic Church is able to maintain the adherence to the truth that it has. So.
Right, that this deposit of faith is given to us in Jesus, and that's unchanging. The magisterium is to serve, to help unpack it, to help explain it, help us to understand it. Meditation, reflections of the saints, teachers of the church can all help us do that. But it was, in the fullness, it's done. It's revealed in Jesus, handed on to the apostles, handed on to us. And that doesn't change. Let's talk a moment about Veritatis Splendor. And um, he was writing it was the early 90s, and we had the chaos of the 60s and 70s and the crazy moral teaching coming out of the church. And people have said like a major point of Veritatis Splendor, right, is to say there are some things that are intrinsically evil. That there's no case where you can do this. It's never justifiable. And because the proportionalism, right, at the time and other theories were saying, okay, well, in this particular case, you can abort a child or you can do whatever. And he drew upon the natural law of John Paul and, in the church and writing this document. And I remember in there, he talks about how, God is the lawgiver. We preserve that, right? That is the eternal law. And our participation in that through reason is the natural law. That's an expression of that eternal law, I guess you'd say. Is that right? Is that what you teach?
No, that's. I mean, in the end, we also have to have our own responsibility. We need to make our own moral choices, and that's the reason. That's essentially the gift of freedom that God gave us. And I think that's also, in a way, a manifestation of the need for us to be able to determine our own, that our own intellect will be able to help us arrive at that truth, that correct decision between good and evil. Obviously, our flawed nature, as I mentioned earlier, would require the intervention sometimes of God Himself directly, and hence you have Scripture. But our intellect has been, we participate in God's presence by the use of our intellect that He has given us. As Augustine would say, I mean, if you have an unjust law, a law that does not conform to the natural law could not be considered as a law at all. One thing that sometimes makes me chuckle is the fact that sometimes I get an accusation. I think every natural lawyer, every lawyer that tries to adhere to the natural law gets an accusation that, you're just trying to use it as a gateway drug to insert your Catholicism in it, which is not necessarily, it's not true. But at the same time, obviously, the reason why you adhere to the natural law is because it brings you to the truth. Now, it just so happens that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, so one can't deny that, but there you go.
Yeah, if God is the lawgiver, it's hard to get away from God if you're following the law.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the U.S. Constitution. Our Declaration of Independence talks about inalienable rights, right? That would be like an expression of the natural law.
Something that's already ineffable, intrinsic. You don't even need to explain it because of the fact that it's self-evident, the self-evident truth,
right?
That we are all equal in the eyes of God, and that man has the rights to life, liberty, and as that document says, the pursuit of happiness is there. So I just simply, I remember Paul Ryan when he was running for the vice presidency. I think this was in 2012. And he kept getting outraged because whenever he makes a speech, he would say that we need to get back to the idea of God, of natural law and nature's God and nature's law. And for some reason, that would cause outrage, which I could never understand. Obviously, there has to be a re-recognition of what the United States is built on this particular idea of self-evident truths, and I think a lot of the problems that we see in the United States right now we're seeing in the United States right now is coming from that rejection of those ideas. No matter how we feel that multiculturalism is something that's enriching us, nevertheless we are still human beings. We need to have a unifying idea and factor. That is what a family is. If a family does not have that common belief, the family simply falls apart. And what is true in the family is simply true as well for a country.
Right, right. It is. I watched a documentary on New York City, and it's just staggering, the amount of people, like especially at the early 1900s. But now I think even immigration now, even by percentage of the total population, I think is greater than it was in the 1900s. But like looking in the early 1900s, you have so many like Europeans coming and stuff, and that how they could make a better life, like within a generation, and they didn't have like caste systems or privileged class of people. People could come and work and get a job, and quickly rise up. I remember the president, Lyndon Johnson, who grew up in poverty in Texas. He said his biographers would say that this marked him his entire life, about that he could be president. He came out of incredible, that America makes it possible, not your class or your family, or these things can help, obviously, or whatever, but it's like still there's that freedom that's allowed, that and the opportunities.
Yeah, and I see that. I mean, coming from the Philippines, where there's an unseen social structure or social rules that essentially try to obstruct any form of mobility, economically or politically. And it's something that we really need to address. And that is why I admire really a country like the United States, wherein you have someone who grew up in a trailer in Arkansas, or you have a black young man from Hawaii could rise up to become president. And I mean, but we have to also remember, how come the United States came to be such a country? What were the virtues that it exercised? What were the values that it upheld, that allowed it to be able to create a societal structure where such possibilities can happen? Unfortunately, I think we're coming to a situation now wherein we have come to such a situation that allowed such to happen, and yet the Americans seem to be turning away from it. And for me, it's not good. The Filipino has a very strong affinity for the United States, and one of the reasons why it may appear that I have a passionate way of talking about the United States is because of the fact that whatever happens in the United States, in a way, reflects what's going to happen in the Philippines a few months later. So, as I was telling Father Mitch, and he was asking me what are the dangers that the Philippines right now societally is facing, and I would tell him, well, right now we're facing legislation that will impose sexual orientation, gender identity ideology on us, transgenderism, possibility of same-sex marriage, and a country that is the last country without a divorce law is now facing the possibility of having a divorce law. And what is the one thing perhaps that we could do to stop it? And I was telling him, well, one big factor is if Trump wins. Because if Trump doesn't win, then the possibility of all these progressive woke ideas suddenly coming into fore in the Philippines would be now a huge possibility. So,
what do you think? I mean, I feel like an old man in this country, that I don't understand what's happening in many ways.
No,
I think of my grandfather looking at the 1960s and complaining about the young people today. I feel like I'm in that position now. It's like, I mean, the growth of this transgender movement is just like absolutely bewildering. And I even to understand the roots of it, it's like, it seemed like something's driving it. I mean, on one level, to me, everything seems to come down to the breakdown of the family. But I don't know. Sometimes too, it seems like there's something more or other factors.
No, I would flat out agree if somebody points out, is there something demonic happening already? And I wouldn't. I used to before, perhaps, chuckle probably at the idea, but now I think there's really something deep and malevolent that I think we need to address. When I was younger, the one thing that I have to be embarrassed about during my high school years is that I wore tight pants and really
parachute pants.
Yeah. 1980s is a new wave and everything. But now, I mean, look at the kids now. 20 years from now, they will say they chopped off their breast or they chopped off whatever. It's easy for an adult to say, kids these days. But it's really different now. There's something completely wrong, And I don't think it's really just a generational matter.
Yeah.
There's something really malevolent happening,
Yeah.
and it's something we need to
Too, I think it's always, I think John Paul II said that human life is always in the crosshairs between this great struggle between the dragon and the woman. The woman being Mary, or the church, you could say. So human life, human dignity. You look at the 20th century with the world wars and the atheistic totalitarian regimes. More people were killed during this time than any other time, more martyrs than any other time. And it's just beyond reason. You look at gas chambers, or genocide, or starving people, in the Ukraine or whatever, and it's just beyond reason, and it does seem like there's a force behind it. With the trans movement, our young people, to me, always in the sexual revolution, women and children are suffering more. And now with the movement, suppressing their growth and the hormones and all this kind of stuff, the children are suffering. And we should, as Christians, help people to work, with the gender dysphoria, to help them work through that, to have compassion, to have charity, to love them, and to help. I mean, teenage years are tough, right? Trying to find yourself and everything, and especially if you have this feeling that this body, I'm in the wrong body. It must be a very difficult cross. But the church is teaching that we are to accept our sexuality, our body, what we've been given by the Lord. And that's just for our, I think, healthy psychology in one sense, that we can't change that. Just because I think differently doesn't change my body. I was given a male body and a soul, right? Then I have to accept that, live in that reality. And there are other cases of intersex, and that gets complicated. But there, the church is merciful, and you try to navigate that to figure out, is this person male or female? With the, you can have XXY or XY chromosomes and things like that. But so that can get complicated. But that's a very small percentage of this movement that we're talking about. And so for human flourishing, we have to live in that reality, right? Live and the human nature that we have. If we contradict that, it's going to be suffering. You can't violate that natural law, we could say, and not have consequences.
Exactly. But at the same time, I think ultimately we have to get back to the idea of gratitude. We can't complain that, I was given the wrong body, I was placed in the wrong, I'm being imposed on the wrong sexuality, and so on. Ultimately, I think we have to be able to come back to the idea of, gratitude in the country that we're in, gratitude for the body that we were given, gratitude for the personality that we have. The fact that we seem to be so ungrateful, the idea that we seem to be entitled to always something better, is another factor, I think, that we need to be able to address. Obviously, there's that idea of not being able to accept what human nature is, that we have a body, we have an intellect, that we are not merely a ghost in the shell, as one philosopher would say. But thinking about it just now, there's also that idea of gratitude, and I think there's a whole lot of ingratitude happening in many parts of the world. My country, your country, the U.S., and the fact that this country has brought so much blessing on its people, and then to be able to be ungrateful at the system and at the society that gave all those blessings, I think is a huge disservice to everybody.
Yeah. And we should say, you just pointed out, I think, the point of the problem with the trans movement, that it's a body-soul unity is what we're given. Yeah, it's not two separate things. Together they're united, and that forms the human person. So we have to accept that body, right? But gratitude. It takes humility to be grateful, and we're not always good at that. And two, I think, just what our culture dangles in front of us all the time. We're so to unsettle us, to make us ungrateful. We always see what this person has, what this person looks like, what this person's doing. And it's always this comparison, that makes us miserable and kind of unhappy. And it's on steroids now, with so much media. We're drenched in all these images and things. And we lose touch with the real. But well, thank you, Doctor, for so much
It's my pleasure. Thank
for
you.
speaking.
Yeah.